became stronger, the Confederates became weaker. The water supply here was the Mississippi River and streams that flowed in from the countryside. The Union Army threw dead animals and that water's contaminated. There are no wells here in Vicksburg. They rely on cistern water during the Civil War era. That's run off from your roof into a tank next to your house that's dug into the ground. That's not going to last very long. By midsummer, you're going to be out of water. So that was their only option. About 300 feet above the water table at the time, so they're not digging a well that deep. What I'll do now is I'm going to turn it over to Bradley Scuria. He's a seasonal ranger here. He's not working here at the park in the summer. He's off at school at a little junior college down in Baton Rouge.
Everybody's a critic.
They're known for their football team.
Thank you, David. I appreciate that. It's nice to know how much jealousy we inspire. As David just said, my name is Brad Scuria. I'm a park ranger here at the National Military Park, and what I'm going to do today is tell you a little bit about this cannon. I see some people covering their ears. You don't have to worry about that. I will warn you well before we have to fire it. That's one of the things we always get is people come up, "Are you going to shoot that cannon?" That's not good. So anyway, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to tell you a little bit about this cannon, about Vicksburg in the Civil War, why it was important, and how the cannons were used here. These microphones never work the way they're supposed to, right? So anyway, as I said, here at Vicksburg, as David was just telling you, it was a siege. The Union did just dig in and wait it out. Essentially, they were just the prisoners. The Confederates, the Union was just waiting for the Confederacy to realize it and just accept it. So all of what David said is very true and very typical of Vicksburg here. Now, why Vicksburg was important to the Civil War? As I'm sure all of you know, it sits right on the Mississippi River. It sits right at a hairpin turn, which means that you can't get past Vicksburg if somebody's attacking you from the land. The high bluffs make it perfect for fortifications and for defensive positions. As well, also, it sits right on a railroad line, which means that all of the Confederates' food, the pork, beef, cane, sugar, grains, anything like that coming from Arkansas, Texas, and Louisiana, which were kind of the breadbasket of the Confederacy, come through Vicksburg and then get spread out everywhere else. As well, small arms, rifles, muskets, anything like that would be traded with Britain. They would trade cotton with Great Britain, ship it over, bring it through Mexico into Texas, across Louisiana, and into Vicksburg, where it gets spread out to the rest of the Confederacy. So you can see why Vicksburg is really important. Abraham Lincoln called it the key to the Confederacy. After the fall of Vicksburg, it's pretty much just a downhill slope for the Confederate States. After that, there's really not a whole lot of hope. Most of the rest of the war is cleaning up, trying to root out those last little strongholds, everything like that. Now here at Vicksburg, I mentioned small arms. Those weren't really used here. It was a siege. They used mainly cannons. They had them arrayed differently. The Union massed all of their cannons into groups. At Tour Stop 1, if you'll take the tour at Battery de Galliard, the very first place you can stop and take a look, you'll see about 20 to 22 cannons. That's typical of what General Grant did here. He would mass all of his cannons in one spot, and as soon as they had an opening, fire all of them at the Confederate fortifications. Now, General Pemberton, the commander of the Confederate forces here, kind of did the opposite. He spread his out as far as they could go. So at the Battery de Galliard, when you look across the way, from all the 22 cannons right there at the Union line, you look across the way at the Confederate lines, there was one. I'm sorry, that's not right, there were 4. I don't know about you, but I think 22 beats 4 every time. Pretty typical. So, as I said, the cannons were used primarily here. Small arms were just used for snipers, sharpshooters, stuff like that, picking off anybody dumb enough to put their head over the fortifications. So this brings me to the cannon behind me. This cannon's official name is the Model 1857 United States Army Light Field Howitzer. It's on the test. Everybody needs to study up. Everybody get that? Good. It was commonly just called a 12-pound Napoleon. Most of the men just called it that. And it's called that, it's called the Napoleon, because it was commissioned and created by the command of Emperor Louis Napoleon III of France. So back then, anything French militarily was good. So, of course, it's a good military, we just copy it. Take everything you can get. The other part of its nickname, the 12-pound, comes... Well, that's not good.
You didn't need that.
I'm a Civil War soldier. They didn't have these back then. So, the other part of its nickname, the 12-pounder, comes from the 12-pound solid shot, which is the main ammunition that was fired out of this cannon. As you can see, it's just solid iron ball, not hollow, it doesn't explode, it just bounces. Which is pretty much what they did with it. They would fire it out of the cannon parallel or slightly lowered, aimed at the ground. They would bounce it on the ground, kind of like bowling for soldiers, if you will. It took out pretty much anything that it hit. Fortifications, cannons, arms, legs, torsos. There are accounts of men who see it bouncing along the ground and it looks just kind of lazily moving. And, you know, it's just kind of coming slowly at me. He sticks his foot out to stop it and it takes the whole leg off. So it's very deadly. It's not, however, the most deadly. As I said, that shot doesn't explode. The exploding ones are the shell, which is basically just a solid shot cast hollow. You can see there's nothing in it. They would fill it with black powder, set a fuse in there. The fuse would be lit by the blast from the muzzle, and depending on how long they cut the fuse, there are 3 seconds, 5 seconds, stuff like that. It would explode. You would want to have it explode about 10 feet in the air and come raining down on the men. They also use this to set fire to things, wooden ships, anything like that, and they used it to explode fortifications. What they found was you shoot a solid shot into a fort, it just makes a little tiny hole right around the size of a solid shot. If you cut the fuse long on a shell and shoot it in there, it explodes, makes a much bigger hole, much more effective. The other explosive round is the spherical case. It's basically just a shell. It's also filled with black powder, but in addition to the black powder, it has 72 of these little mini balls that you see inside. It is pretty much just an anti-personnel round. They used it, again, would have it explode about 10 feet in the air, right above the heads of their enemies, and rain down all the shrapnel on the Union soldiers attacking. Now, I say they would rain down shrapnel, and it's pretty fitting for this because that ammunition was actually designed by a man by the name of Henry Shrapnel, a British artillery officer, which is where we get the word today. Let's see if this works better a second time. Now then, the most talked about shot, but the least used, is the canister. You can see, it's just a tin can. Not much else to it, except it's also filled with 27 little 1.5-inch cast iron balls. And basically what it does is it turns the cannon into a giant shotgun. It shoots out about 20-yard radius, devastating to anybody attacking. Now I said it's the least used. Electronics hate me for some reason. I said it's the least used, and that's true because the solid shot, the shell, the spherical case, all had a range of about a mile. It means you could shoot that accurately at about a mile. You could hit a barn at about a mile out of this cannon with those 3 shots. The canister has a range of about 400 yards, which is nice because, you know, that's pretty far. It's about 4 football fields. But at the same time, that's about the same range as some of the rifles of the Civil War, which means that if you have to resort to using canister, they can start picking off all of your cannoneers. So it's kind of scary for both sides to have to use canister. The side attacking because they're about to get hit with a canister, the side using the canister because they have to use a canister and that means they can start dying. Now, to load and fire this gun, it is a very detailed, very thorough process. It does usually take 8 men. There are drills for using less. There are drills for 6, for 4, and even there's a drill for 2 men to fire this gun. That's incredibly dangerous. I hope we never have to resort to that. Behind me, all of the men are numbered 1 through 7, and then the gunner, the only man with a name. Number 1 is up front there with a nice long staff. He's got a sponge on one end and a ramming chalk on the other. Very creatively named. It's called a sponge rammer. Very nice. Number 2 is across the way from him. He's the one who's actually going to load the round into the cannon. Number 3 is behind number 1 here on the back. Give him a thumbs up there. He's got a thumb stall on so he can stop the vent in the back of the cannon. And that's to create a vacuum in the back so you're not just fanning the embers when you put stuff down there. Number 4 is across the cannon from him. He's the actual trigger man. Number 5 is the gentleman back here with the fancy purse. It's not called a purse, it's called a gunner's haversack. And what he does is he'll actually transport the round from, when he gets it from number 6 and 7, back on the limber there. We only have a number 6 right now, so he'll do both jobs. He transports it from the limber chest all the way up to number 2. And the only man with a name is the gunner, who is actually in charge of the gun. So at this point, I'm going to have these guys behind me go through a process called a load by detail. And this is the actual drill that they would have used in the Civil War. Drill and drill and drill and drill until it's in their muscles. It's in their muscle memory, so they don't even have to think about what they're doing on it. And every man would be trained on every position. So that way if something goes wrong, somebody gets shot or taken out, somebody can just fill in and do both jobs. So at this point, gunner.
It is your post. By detail. Whoa!
Now, as I said, it is a very detailed, very thorough process. Every single step is
2.
prescribed in a book somewhere, in a manual, and every single person learns it until they don't even think about it. As you can see in the back here, number 3 has his thumb on that vent to stop any air from getting through.
4.
Number 1 pushes the sponge down. He's already wet it in the sponge bucket up front, gotten it nice and damp so that when he pushes it down, it'll put out any embers there. Because when you've been firing all day and you're just ramming charges down, if you ram the charge down and there's an ember there, it'll go off and number 1 will lose a hand or an arm, probably both.
2.
As I said, number 3 is creating a vacuum. That thud you just heard means that number 3 is doing his job, which is a great sound to hear. He brings the sponge rammer around and dings the bottom of the barrel. That's the sign to number 5 that he needs to bring the round up and give it to number 2. He'll bring it around and place it into the barrel of the cannon.
4.
At this point, number 1 assumes a position called refusing the shoulder. As you can see, his hand is back. He's palming the staff because if you have a death grip on it and the gun goes off while you're ramming it, you're going to lose that whole arm. This way, he'll just lose a hand.
Ram.
Safety of the Civil War is all like that, you know, trying to minimize damage. As you can see, he's thrown his arm back across the cannon. He's leaning back against the carriage. That's so if it goes off, he'll just fall back with it instead of being right there by it. He's looking downrange because if it goes off, it does shoot a very nice flame out.
3.
It looks very pretty at night, unless you're on the other side, I guess. He's looking downrange just so that if it goes off, he'll just lose an ear rather than an eye or a whole face.
Random gun in the battery.
Here at Vicksburg, it was battery warfare. So what they would do is they would have to load it in the back and then move it forward every time. They would usually have it back far enough just from the recoil from the powder charge. At this point, the gunner is aiming the gun with one of the newest technologies of the Civil War called a pendulum hoss. As you can see, it's just a pendulum on a 3-way swivel. It's got degrees of elevation on it. And what that allows him to do is it allows him to aim it on an incline. Before this, in the Mexican-American War, for example, you always saw the cannons on flat ground, on road beds, or they would have to dig out the side of a hill so that it was on flat ground so they could aim it properly. Now, to raise or lower the muzzle, what it'll do is turn the elevating screw in the back. You raise the muzzle up to shoot further, point it down to have it come closer in, and to move it left or right, he'll tap the stock of the carriage. And number 3 on the back there will move it back and forth. He gives the touchdown sign, that means everything's good. And the next command is?
Ready!
And at this point, number 4 the trigger man that I told you about, we're not going to fire it right now, folks. I'll give you a warning. Number 4, the trigger man takes out what is called a friction primer, another new technology. Before this, you'd see people lighting the fuses on the cannons. Not anymore. What this is a ridiculously large model version, to be honest with you. They're normally about an inch long, filled with gunpowder, a little bit of wax at the bottom, and at the top they have the chemicals that you would find in the head of a match. So that when he does pull the lanyard, it pulls the wire, it strikes the chemicals, the gunpowder ignites and shoots down into the cannon and makes the gun go boom. So at this point, I'm going to have the guys go through a real load, and you'll see it moves much more quickly than what we just showed you. That was the drill. It moves much more quickly. We will be firing a pound of black powder. I'll warn you when you have to cover your ears, so don't worry about that. And I hope you all enjoy it. Gunner, you may commence firing.
Finish your post. Solid shot. Low. Ready to move gun in the battery. Bow hands to the front. March. Halt. Ready.
Folks, at this point, you want to cover your ears.
Fire.
Not advanced, primers failed.
Well, what we have here is a misfire. This is actually something that would be fairly common during the Civil War when you've got 400 cannons going off in the surrounding area. You got 400 cannons going off, you can't hear. If you're not watching the muzzle, you won't see the flash. You can't hear anything, you just hear a cannon go off, and it could be the one next to you, it could be the one across the way. So they would do this, and then they would just reload. You know, it's very dangerous. During this, here at the Park Services, we are very safety conscious, safety oriented, so we have to wait 30 seconds in between any kind of misfire.
I'll explain to you what happened.
Cover your ears, folks.
You just do your arm, you whiplash it, it'll flip it right out of the hook.
Fire.
See how he did it? He let his upper body weight pull the lanyard.
That's more like it.
Do it with your arm. Do like that, it'll flip right up.
Wake all the neighbors up.
We did just fire a pound of black powder. During the Civil War, they would have used 2 to 2.5 pounds. So that was half a charge. Imagine that right next to your ear, coming at you, right next to your ear, on the other side of you, all the way down the line, over and over again, without ear protection. They didn't have anything like that.
Did he say how far back it was?
As you're going through the park today, please do be careful. We are in Mississippi. For some reason, a lot of bugs here like to bite you. So be careful, don't walk through any tall grass. We also have snakes in there. All of the cannons you see in the park are still loaded, not with solid shot or canister or anything like that, but with wasp nests, bees. We even had a couple of birds living down there. So please be careful, don't look directly down the barrel, don't stick your arm down it. We even had people stick a baby down it.
Wow. For a picture,
Yeah.
I guess.
People are crazy, right? Please do be careful about the heat. Once again, we are in Mississippi. It gets really hot. We have plenty of water here, and I hope you folks have the same. I hope you enjoy your time here in the Vicksburg National Military Park. Once the cannon is secure, feel free to come in and take a look around, ask these guys any questions you may have. They'll be more than happy to answer them. And I hope you have a great time. Thank you for coming.